All right, welcome back. So in this video, I want to now start talking about what you can actually do once you've learned to control your subconscious. So like I said before, there's four main things. So the first thing that I want to discuss has to do with your emotions, right? So emotions, so in my studies, I've actually learned that emotions come from the subconscious mind, right? So we're told that emotions come from the brain, right? So the brain, like I said, your consciousness, we're told that the subconscious and your conscious mind actually are emergent. They emerge, right, from the interaction of neurons in the brain, right? So they're emergent phenomena. No, right, that's not true, at least according to my studies and what I believe. So the conscious mind is metaphysical, right? But the subconscious is also metaphysical. And I've learned that emotions actually come from the subconscious, not the brain at all, right? Of course, the brain is just physical materials, right? They don't have the capability, or the brain doesn't have the capability of producing an emotion or a thought, by the way. So, and then what a lot of people who believe in materialism will say is, well, you know, we have experiments that show that the brain affects emotions, of course, right? No, right? The brain, well, I should say, they would say that because the brain affects emotions, right, clearly that means they come from the brain. Emotions come from the brain. No, right? So the brain, like I said before, it interacts with your subconscious. And in the process of interacting with your subconscious, it can affect your emotions. That's true. But emotions do not come from the brain, right? They come from your subconscious mind, right? So, and this is what I was saying last video, right? So the subconscious has a whole bunch of rules to it, very similar to learning the laws of physics, and that's pretty much what the whole course, the whole curriculum is going to be about, is teaching you those rules. I mean, primarily in book 1. We do learn new rules in book 2, but we mostly learn them in terms of applying them. And I'll talk a little more about what to expect in book 2 in the later videos, and later among these intro videos. But yeah, so once you learn those rules and you learn how to control your subconscious, you will actually know how to also control your emotions. So that's something that I've learned how to do. Now, when you say, when you hear that, right, control your emotions, you might think of it in a way it's normally sort of presented to someone, right? So most people, when they say control your emotions, they mostly mean just, you know, don't get too angry or something, right? Don't get too angry. Keep yourself under control. Do not respond to every impulse you feel. That's not what I mean by control emotions, right? So when I say control emotions, what I mean is you can basically pick any emotion you want, any single one. If you're in a mood to just feel like you're having fun, if you're in a mood to feel more peaceful, right? People do that a lot with meditation, or feel more tranquility. If you want to feel more like you're in love, right? That's a good one too. No matter what the emotion is, just pick one, any one. I don't know how many emotions there are. It feels like there's practically an infinite amount of them, right? There are different sort of, I call them shades. So we'll talk more about that in chapter 1 of the book. But when we go over chapter 1 in the curriculum. But there are many different emotions, right? Pick whatever one you feel like. You can just make yourself feel, you can make yourself feel it as intensely as you want to, right? So if I want to feel like I'm having fun, I can pretty much just control my subconscious, and I can feel like I'm having fun this much. I can feel like I'm having fun this much. I can feel like I'm having fun this much, and I can keep going. And when the funny thing is when I was first learning how to control my emotions, I was trying to see if there was an upper limit. That's actually kind of how I started studying all this. It was just a curious sort of experiment I was thinking about, that's kind of the stuff I do. I've always done stuff like that. But this particular time, this was the experiment I was doing. I was trying to see if there was like a ceiling specifically I was trying to figure out what happens when you raise your emotions to a certain degree, right? Are there certain changes in the experience of reality or their mind and things like that, right? And in the process of doing that, right, I learned about the subconscious. I learned of the connection between emotions and the subconscious mind. And I learned basically how to just keep, like I said, pick any emotion I want and go as high as I want to. And when I really learned how to do it, I never really reached a ceiling, I would say, right? I could keep going. But and I'll say, you'll understand why I word it that way in chapter 1. But more specifically, if you raise your emotions, right, to a certain degree, it just, your mind starts to feel like it's all over the place, right? And again, that'll make more sense when we talk about in we get to chapter 8, right? Chapter 9. Then I'll go into, that'll make more sense why I say that. But suffice it to say, your mind is just kind of all over the place to get to it stable. So I don't raise my emotions to too high a degree, but you can there's really no ceiling. I've never discovered the ceiling. You can just keep raising it higher and higher and higher, right? And that's something that when I first learned how to do that, right, I had a blast, right? Because what I kept doing was I just kept picking emotions and making myself feel it to the nth degree, right? And it felt amazing, right? And another thing I should say is I always say right. I say it so much because when I already record all the videos for the curriculum already, so I'm actually going back to make these intro videos for the YouTube channel. And when I'm watching the videos, I notice how much I say that. I'm like, I'm talking about the subconscious mind, and I'll just keep saying right. Well, so I'll say something like the subconscious mind, right, is a metaphysical component, right? And you can learn how to control it, right? So I know I keep saying that, right? And I do say it enough that's kind of annoying, right? But I just say that, I find that I end up talking that way when I'm on camera because I'm thinking, right? So, and I even say it now, I say it so much that I do it without thinking about it. So if you keep hearing me say like right after every word, that's just something I do on camera, right? To buy time for me thinking about something. So like I said, I know it's a little annoying, but that's just something I ended up doing. But, so yeah, going back to what I was saying, when I learned how to do that, right, to raise my emotions, I had a blast because I could just, no matter what mood I would, well, let me put it this way. When you learn how to control your subconscious, you're not really at the mercy of the world around you, right? In the sense that it is much harder to sort of find yourself just in a bad mood or feeling hopeless and this and that, right? Once I learned to control my emotions, I just started picking whatever emotions I wanted to, raise them to the nth degree, and I just had a great time. I just stayed like that all day, right? And ultimately, my experience of reality now, since learning to control my emotions, is completely different than when I didn't know, right? Because I think a lot of people sort of, how do I want to word this? A lot of people, because they think emotions are a product of the state of reality around them, the external reality, because they think reality is a function of their external reality, they try to change the external reality so that they can be in a particular emotional state, right? So if I think I need money, for example, and I got to buy all these things to be happy, right? Well, then I'm going to pursue all these things to try to change the environment around me so that I can have money, so I can have this house, this car, this chick, or something like that. And it's like, no, right? Because that presupposes that your emotions are what you feel, which is really what you mean by being happy, right? Is you feel good in a lot of ways. That presupposes that emotions are a product of the external reality, which they're not, right? So it doesn't matter what you do in the external reality. If your subconscious mind is not in a particular state, you're not going to be happy. It makes no difference how things change around you. So I learned that to be happy is actually a representation or is a product or a function of the state of your subconscious. So I just started learning to change the state of my subconscious. And I learned how to feel so amazing, feel so amazing and feel so many amazing emotions and just make myself in a good mood all the time, right? That it completely changed my life. It's hard for me to even relate to what it's like to sort of feel at the mercy of your environment. I haven't done that in years now, right? Because I've been studying the subconscious mind for so many years, and I learned how to do that years ago with my emotions. And it's like, to be honest, you can kind of say that I'm almost out of touch with, like, I guess what people normally do. But like when I try to describe what I can do to other people, I can tell that they're always trying to presume that they can understand what it's like to do what I do in their terms, right? And I can always tell that they don't understand it based on the questions they ask, based on the things they say. It's like it's inconceivable to them, what it's like to live in this way, right? What it's like to live with the ability to just pick any feeling you want and to raise it to the highest degree, right? And it's an amazing feeling because you just feel so much more free, right? You feel emotionally free, emotional freedom. Now, does this solve all your problems? Of course not, right? And we're actually going to talk more about that later. What is the solution to pretty much all your problems? But in fact, that is, I'll even say now we talk a little more about this in chapter 14, right? But in book 1, but yeah, so what I eventually learned was that, or what I experienced when I was first doing this stuff is I would get so used to just raising my emotions to such high levels and feeling amazing and feeling like I'm having a wonderful time. Basically just being in the most amazing mood you can imagine, right? I would do that so much that I started overdoing it. I started overdoing it, and then I learned that there's actually a downside to overdoing, which is kind of similar to what happens when you take drugs, except what I'm talking about doesn't have any of the negative physical side effects, as far as I know, right? So, but yeah, so that's basically what I want to talk about in this video, is that you will learn to control your emotions, and you can raise them to as intense and intense, you can make them more intense, and more intense, right? So if you just want to feel like I said, if you want to feel like you're in love, right, and you want to feel like you're in love to the most intense level possible, right, which is a very high level, right? But if you want to feel like you're in love in the most intense way possible, you can do that, right? And see, I can keep going, right? But I'm gonna I'll talk more about this later, right? Because some people will think like, oh, I need my girlfriend, or I need my boyfriend or whatever to do certain things and I can feel this feeling of love. No, it doesn't work. It has nothing to do really with what they're doing. Now, that's not true for the case of love for reasons we'll talk about in the last chapter of book 2, right? That's a much more advanced concept. But suffice it to say, right, it doesn't depend on what anyone else is doing as much as you think. It depends on what you're doing, right? And I can tell you there'll be certain conditions that once you reach a certain subconscious state, there's almost nothing a person can do. It doesn't matter how much, let's say it's a guy and a chick, right? It doesn't matter how much the guy buys the chick flowers or tells her she's beautiful or any of that. Like, it makes no difference. She's not going to feel that love feeling. He could do everything the girl asks and she still won't feel the feeling of love because it has nothing to do with that, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's one of the things you'll learn how to do once you can learn to control your emotions. I think I mentioned in a previous video that when I learned how to do that, right, it changed my life, right? And I don't even know I can't even imagine what it's like to go back to a life where I didn't just control my subconscious to feel emotional pleasure is basically how I describe it. I use that terminology more in chapter 14, but yeah, it is a very pleasurable experience. It is a wonderful experience. And it's hard for me to even imagine how people even live that way, like not doing that, right? Like, I would feel like I was trapped in like some type of prison, if I wasn't able to do that, if I was actually at the mercy of the world around me for my emotional state, trying to change the world so I can feel a certain way. That's a crazy way to live, but that's what people do. And so that's kind of why I'm making these videos, so that people learn the proper way to control their emotions, and I think it'll allow them to experience greater happiness, right? To be very happy overall, right? And not be like sad and upset and things like that and angry. Not that these things won't happen at all, right? But, it'll be much less, and when it does happen, you'll understand it more, right? But yeah, so that's it. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the second thing you can learn to do once you've learned to control your subconscious. And that has to do with basically the way you perform, right? But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.